Let's take a look at how I mastered Dabbles Out of This Love by Maroon 5. After the first listen through, I knew that I wanted to add some saturation and fullness to the track, especially in like the low end and the low mids where that bass is really sitting. I wanted to make the track feel a little bit less digital by running it through some like analog gear emulations, take care of some harshness in the upper mid range, then lastly just dial in some loudness. So first off, shout out to Davos for leaving me some nice headroom to do my thing. First on the chain, I have the Oxford inflator at about 19%, and this is adding some transparent saturation to the track. Next, I have the Pultec, which is adding a little bit of volume and some subtle analog color. I'm adding about 1 dB at 300 Hertz to add a little bit of weight to the low mids. And then I'm softening the high end with this attenuation knob right here. So I'll just demonstrate that. And it gets it ready for the next step, which is this clariphonic EQ, which is normally one of my go-to plugins to add brightness. It does a great job, but again, we just dampen the high end a little bit, so I didn't necessarily want to like add a bunch more high end. Just the default setting added a really tiny amount, and then again, this is another analog emulation. So these analog software emulations aren't going to be quite as good as if you were to have an actual like analog desk or console or something, but having multiple software analog emulations as part of my chain, I'm trying to mimic that feel a little bit in the box. Next, I have some subtractive EQ, just tightening up the sides and the low end here, and then addressing some harshness in like the 1 to 3K area. Then I have a little bit more additive EQ with targeted bumps in the low end, really small. These are both under a decibel. Then you'll see we have an overall gradual curve, bringing the low end back down with the isotope in just a second. And I'm taking care of this resonance at about 2K. So I like to see what the Ozone Master Assistant kind of comes up with on its own. Most of the time I end up undoing a lot of it, but sometimes I'll leave certain modules up here and just really dial back the mix. So again, we have some gentle rebalancing. This curve starting up around 1100 Hertz, and it's just gradually going down to the sub frequencies here. Next is the isotope imager, and I just brought this all the way down to 4%. And then lastly, there's this stabilizer on this EDM setting. I brought the mix down to about 25%. I thought this stabilizer module was adding some clarity in kind of the low mids where that bass is really driving, and the vocal. Some mid compression, and the idea with this was to bring the mids of the track a little bit more to the forefront, and I just dialed the mix down to 44%. Right, so when it's engaged, it just feels like the vocal and some of the other mid information comes a little bit more to the forefront. We have some clipping with standard clip, a couple of really small volume automations during the build section, so it just feels like the drop hits a little bit harder. And then lastly, some limiting. This might seem like a lot, but each of the moves are pretty subtle, right? Like the EQ moves are less than a dB in most cases, and the mix is often turned down with the other processing that I'm using. In the mastering process, we don't really want to be super drastic or completely change the song. We just want to enhance what's already there. So to summarize, we did a bit of saturation, we did some subtractive and additive EQ to help just improve the overall balance and take care of some harshness. We ran it through some analog emulations of gear, and then finally some dynamics control and loudness with compression, clipping, and limiting. Definitely go check out this groovy edit by Davo. I believe it's a free download, and feel free to hit me up if you want to work together.